Reverend Scates served as our interim senior pastor from 2015 to 2017. That was a critical time in our FPC history, when we very much needed an experienced pastor with strong leadership skills to guide us, and we all thank you for that. In addition to the senior pastoral positions, he has been a provider for supply preaching and has held leadership positions on various boards. Now, today he's going to review for us the wonderful book, A Prophet with Honor, the Billy Graham Story by William Martin. I've also asked Reverend Scates if he'd be kind enough to kind of fill us in on what he's been doing since his retirement. I know he's been doing mission work. So it's my pleasure to introduce Reverend Scates.
Thank you. I'll give you a little update on what I'm up to. I'm officially rewired. I don't refuse to use the word retired. Rewired as of last July 1st. And I'm your supply preacher for your church plant in Bernie, Texas, Christ the Hills Presbyterian Church, while they're looking for their permanent pastor. So I have to preach every Sunday. I have a reason to get up every morning because I have to put a sermon together every week. And Ann comes south to worship here, and I go north to Bernie. I'm also involved in a church planting ministry based out of Jakarta, Indonesia, out of a university there, a Christian university called Pelita Harapan University. It's about the size of Baylor. It's a full-blown research university, medical school, law school, etc. And we're doing something pretty unique. We are planting what I call holistic servanthood communities of church, school, and clinic in villages, towns, and cities across Indonesia. If you go to Pelita Harapan University to their teacher's college, you get a free ride for 4 years if you give 5 years back to the university, because they have a secondary, actually an elementary through high school system around the country. And so when you graduate, you get a teaching position at least for 5 years. If you go to medical school there as a doctor or a nurse, you go on a full ride. But you got to give 5 years back to the Siloam medical system, which is a part of the university. It's the best medical system in the country, although I would never go to it myself. But in Indonesia, it's the best. And so I came up with the idea, why don't we put the three together, and we're in the largest Muslim nation in the world. And there are pockets of radicalized Islam there. One Sunday I was flying back from one of our church plants in an area called Manado, which is on another island, about as north as you can go just before you get to the Philippines. And I'm flying back on a Lion Boeing 737. And the guy next to me is Indonesian. He looks at me and goes, "Where are you from?" I knew he was asking me. Obviously I was not Indonesian. I said, "Jakarta." He said, "You're not Indonesian." I said, "No, I'm not, but I do live in Jakarta right now." And he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a pastor." "Did you hear about the 3 churches bombed this morning?" I said, "No." And about 300 miles from Jakarta, an area called Sambara, 3 churches, 2 Protestant and 1 Roman Catholic church were bombed. Now, the big church in Indonesia is Presbyterian, not Roman Catholic or some other denomination. We are the go-and show over there, have been for 400 years, because the Dutch colonized Indonesia. If you go in downtown Jakarta, the version of First Pres there has a 25-story education building and a sanctuary that seats 5,000. The senior pastor there is a good friend of mine, Stephen Tong. He also happens to be the conductor of the Jakarta Symphony Orchestra. And the Symphony Hall, ranked one of the 5 best in the world, is on the campus of the church. And so I don't feel unsafe at all in Indonesia when I'm there. And Muslims are coming to Christ, and Buddhists and Hindus and animists and nominal Christians through our church plant. So it's an exciting place to be, and in 48 hours from now, I'll be somewhere between Dallas and Tokyo, heading to Jakarta for 3 weeks. So that's sort of what I do in my rewirement. So it's great to be here with you. I'm really on my fourth tenure at First Pres. I first came here in summer of 1977. We were interns for the summer. And you kicked us out, but we're like boomerangs. And we came back in 1979, and 10 years, I got to serve with my dear brother Lewis. And then guys kicked us out, and we went to Baltimore for 11 years, and Dallas for 15 years, and back here again for the interim thing. And now you kicked us out, but we don't go away. We're here, and we're here to stay. And we live in Hill Country Village, our little 2.5-acre ranchette, and that's where I plan on going home to the Lord. So anyway, it's great to be here with you all today. October 17th through 20th, 2002, was the Dallas Billy Graham Crusade. And y'all remember Paul Harvey? Now you know the rest of the story. That week, his story was about a 10-year-old boy whose parents took him to a Billy Graham crusade in Washington, D.C., an old Griffith Stadium, which doesn't exist anymore. And at one night during the crusade, Billy was preaching, and Paul Harvey said that little boy didn't want to be there. His parents drug him. But Billy was given the invitation, and the little 10-year-old boy turned to his dad and said, "I'm going down." And after the ushers picked his dad up off the floor, the little boy went down on the infield. A counselor met with him, talked with him, made sure he understood the gospel of grace. And that little 10-year-old boy prayed to receive Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. And Paul Harvey said it was the real deal. Well, fast forward to 2002, Paul Harvey said that little boy diverted from a career in veterinary medicine and wound up becoming a pastor, and then wound up being on the executive committee that was calling Billy Graham to Dallas that week. And that young man also happened to be the senior pastor of the church that his predecessor was Billy Graham's brother-in-law, Clayton Bell. And Paul Harvey said, and now you know the rest of the story. Now, if you haven't figured it out, that little boy was me. I never heard it. Ann heard it on the radio. I was all week. People were coming to me, "You're on Paul Harvey." I was like, whoa, cool, I guess. But so Billy Graham is my father in the faith. And I'm proud of that. I am honored by that. And so when I became an adult and began to realize who Billy Graham really was, I always wanted to meet him. And while I was an associate pastor here, sitting in my office down underneath the front steps of the church, now it's a closed closet or something, phone rang out of the blue. It was the editor of Christianity Today magazine. And he said, "I'm calling you because our board of Christianity Today is meeting in San Antonio, our next board meeting at the St. Anthony Hotel on such and such a date. And we ran all the pastors in San Antonio through our database. Computers were kind of brand new then. And he said, we decided we'd ask the pastor in San Antonio to come and speak to the board who subscribed to more of our magazines than anybody else. They only had 3. Christianity Today, Leadership Journal. I subscribed to both those. And I think all the other pastors here got those 2. But no other pastor in town subscribed to the 3rd one, which was Campus Life magazine, because I happen to be also the co-leader of the Alamo Heights Youth for Christ Campus Life Club. And so they said, "You're the only guy that gets all of our publications." So I agreed to come and speak. And I thought, wow, Billy Graham's on the board. I am going to meet him. Showed up at St. Anthony that night, so excited to meet Billy. The first person I saw in God's providence was Clayton Bell. Now, I knew who Clayton Bell was because he had recruited me, tried to get me to leave here and come be his college pastor at Highland Park, but I turned it down. So I saw Clayton and I said, "Clayton, I'm so excited to meet Billy Graham tonight." He goes, "Oh, you haven't heard?" And I said, "No, what?" So, well, he fell in the bathtub and broke 2 or 3 ribs. He's not going to be here. I was like, "Ugh." Well, then maybe 10 years later, Montreat Anderson College called me and said, "We'd like you to deliver the Staley lectures for a whole week at Montreat Anderson College," and blah, blah, blah. And part of the incentive was they said, Billy Graham is always there. If he's in town, he's always at these stations. I thought, yes, this is my second opportunity. This time I'm going to meet Billy Graham. I'll be there for a whole week with him. This is going to be great. Got there and said, is Billy going to be here? No, he's doing a crusade in Timbuktu. I was like, ugh. So then I get asked to be on the executive committee in 2002 to bring Billy to the Dallas crusade. Now, I know how it works, and I know that right before the crusade, Billy gets there, and he meets with the executive committee. So all of a sudden in the Dallas Morning News, there's an article about, because they were pushing the crusade, and there's an article about Billy is in the Menninger Clinic in Minnesota or something with some abscess on the brain or something. Questionable whether he was going to be there. I'm like, here we go. I'm going to strike out, strike three. In fact, we had it so that Franklin Graham was ready to take the crusade because it looked like Billy wouldn't make it. Before the crusade kicked off, the day before, the executive committee was to meet with Billy Graham out in an area called the Colony outside of Dallas. I remember driving out there with Ann, and I was negative. I said, he ain't going to be there. He ain't going to be there. Oh, we're going to meet, but no, he's not going to be there, Ann. Got there he was. He stayed seated the whole evening we're there, but I got to meet him, talk to him, and that was one of the highlights of my life, to meet my father in the faith. So I'm unabashedly a product of Billy Graham's ministry, and I was delighted when I was asked to come and share with you, review this book, Prophet with Honor, the Billy Graham story by William Martin, who was a retired sociology professor at Rice University. So first thing I want to say is don't be intimidated by the size of this book. It is long. I took it with me to Indonesia in October, read most of it over there. But this is one of those books. You know, have you ever read a book where, you come home at night and you can't wait to read the next chapter? That's the way this was for me. Have you ever read a book that, you're actually sad when it's over and you're like, oh gosh, I wish there was like 3 more chapters? That's the way I felt when this was over. The original edition of this was 1991, but William Martin did a second edition in 2018. It came out in March of last year. Billy died just a couple of weeks before it came out. He didn't know that was going to happen. So he won't need to do, a third edition because he took it right up to 2017. And so it's really a great book. And this is an unauthorized biography, which means the Graham family and Billy himself did not ask this to be done, and they didn't have any control over what's in here. I'd never read this because I have the authorized biography of Billy Graham. And so I was glad I hadn't read it because I was like, wow, let's see how they compare. Now, you need to know a little bit about William Martin. Some books, some biographies are like hagiographies, they make the person look like if they came over to your house and you had a swimming pool, they could walk across it. Don't say anything bad about them, kind of paint this, they deserve a place in a stained glass window someplace. Then you have other books that are kind of hit pieces, like Mommy Dearest type of things. This is neither. William Martin, interestingly enough, had been an evangelist in his own right back in his younger days. So he understands that milieu. Now, he's obviously a Christian. But I got the feeling reading, because he spends the first part of the book talking about how he approached the task, that he was not going to write a hagiography, and this is not to get Billy. He was going to he kept saying, I'm going to try to interview as many people as I can, including Billy Graham, and try to do a fair and balanced and faithful analysis of the entirety of this man's life. The good, the bad, and you read the book and you find out there really is not any ugly to Billy Graham at all. And he achieves his goal. He did hundreds and hundreds of interviews with Billy, the Graham family, folks in the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, pastors around the country, people that are products of the Billy Graham Crusades. He really covered the waterfront, and he asked hard questions, even of Billy. In fact, when he asked Billy the hard questions, that's really part of the best part of the book, because Billy answers honestly, and I'll get into some of those in just a moment. And he's an excellent writer. It really sings what he writes here. At least it did for me. And so I really enjoyed this book. And he really covers the waterfront of Billy's life from when he's a little boy. But actually, I love history, and I love church history. And if you don't get turned off by the beginning of the book, because what he does is he goes back into the 18th and 19th centuries and lays the context of evangelists and the whole evangelical movement in the United States, even back to the colonies. And all the great evangelists in America, 9 out of 10 of them were Presbyterians. Usually we think of Baptists being the evangelists. Did you know Billy Graham wasn't Baptist? He was Presbyterian. He was raised in Calvary Presbyterian Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. His dad was an elder there. Billy married a Presbyterian, Ruth, son of Nelson Bell, Presbyterian U.S., missionary to China. Clayton Bell, my predecessor at Highland Park, was her brother. And Ruth never became anything other than a Presbyterian. She belonged, and all the Graham children belonged to Montreat Presbyterian Church, which is now an eco with us. And that's where they worship. And that's where Billy worshiped every Sunday that he was home. He was there with the Graham family in Montreat Presbyterian Church. So he's really one of us. But he's a Baptist. We know why? Because he applied to be an evangelist to the Southern Presbyterian Church. And they said, well, you got to go to seminary. Billy had been to Bible college, but he'd not been to seminary. And he says, I feel called to go now. And they said, well, no, you got to go to Princeton or Union or something for 3 years and then get your MDiv, and then we'll consider making you an evangelist. The Baptists came along and said, you're ordained, and that's the only reason Billy is a Baptist instead of a Presbyterian. The three major temptations in the areas of sin that are the downfall of all Christians, but especially those in ministry, are money, sex, and power. And William Martin deals with all of those things in Billy's life. And he asks Billy the hard questions in those three areas. Now, it's interesting. Billy, he didn't walk on water, but, survey after survey, every year, he was always the most admired man in America, right up until the time he died. And, you probably wonder, well, is that just because there's a lot of mythology caked around him? But what was the real Billy Graham like? I remember, I think it was 1970, I'm not sure. I think I was a sophomore at Trinity University. I was there, I was a pre-veterinary major. I didn't have many electives, and I was hoping to go to A&M's vet school. And it's really hard to get it. You can only apply to one vet school in the nation. You got to go to your state school. You can't apply to, medical school, you can apply to 150 of them. So everything rides on your grade point average and your organic chemistry grade. So any electives I could take, I was looking for slam dunk A's. So I got word that there was a sociology class. If you show up, you make an A in that grade. It's so easy. So, man, I was there. Professor was a guy named O.Z. White. Raise your hand if you went to Trinity University and you remember O.Z. White. I didn't know him from the man in the moon. I heard that he was real easy, and so that's all I needed to know. So we're in there. I couldn't care less about sociology, but it was 4 hours a A. So I was padding my grade point. One day, I don't remember what we're talking about, but some student launched into a tirade on Billy Graham, that he was, fake and blah, 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 and probably was driving Bentleys on the side. And I'm sitting there. Now, I'm on a prodigal journey away from Christ at that time, even though I was a product of Billy Graham. And so I'm like, well, I don't like what that guy's saying, but I don't know Billy Graham. Maybe he's telling the truth. But right then, I had no dog in the fight. But boy, did that kid light O.Z. White's fire. All of a sudden, O.Z. White cuts him off, and he said, don't you ever say anything derogatory about Billy Graham. I'm like, the whole class is like, gosh, and some of you know O.Z. He was out of the box. He was an iconoclast. He was not your traditional straight-laced professor. He'd use profanity and all this in the class. And so I'm thinking, what is going on here? Why is he was the last guy I'd expect to defend Billy Graham. And then O.Z. told us a little bit about himself. He had been a Presbyterian pastor. He had been on the staff of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. I can't remember in what capacity. And somewhere along the line, he had lost his faith. And at least he had the integrity to quit. And he said, I don't believe what Billy Graham believes anymore, but I'll tell you this, there's no finer man that's ever walked the planet save Jesus Christ. He is impeccably moral. There's no, skeletons in his closet, etc. And I was cool. Wow. So that's just a little anecdotal thing. And this book lines up with what O.Z. said. Let me talk about those three areas: money, sex, and power. Early on, Billy's just an amazing guy. If you look at his background, his educational background, his theological training and everything, you would never expect this guy to have this meteoric rise like he does. But he does. Why is that? Well, I would say he's one of those few people that comes along every once in a while who God just anoints, puts his hand on him. I mean, if I got a volume of Billy Graham's sermons and preached them in that sanctuary for a month, you all would either fall asleep or walk out, maybe both. But when Billy could read the phone book and you'd be on the edge of your seat, he's anointed. When it came to money, that was never a problem for Billy Graham. My wife, Ann, gets into these Netflix series. I don't like watching TV, but so I can be with her, I'll watch every once in a while. She got into this thing. It was about she's from Memphis. It was about a pastor's family in Memphis, African-American, and the guy pastored this large mega church, and they lived in this, opulent mansion. They were driving Bentleys and wearing Rolexes, and there was affairs and mismanagement of money and all that kind of stuff. That's not Billy Graham. We can tell stories about televangelists that have crashed and burned. And Billy had every opportunity to get at what all those guys went after. And he never did. And right from the beginning, he decided he would take a salary that was set by the board. And he said, just set it at what you think is fair to pay me. And, Billy wrote, gosh, I don't know how many, 28 books or something. He never got a cent from any of those books. Most evangelists would take up love offerings because they loved money. And Billy never did that. He never, no matter how much money came in on the Crusades, not one penny of that went into his pocket other than what his salary was. And that salary went up a little bit, but he lived very, very modestly. In the book, he talks about, he said, William, my favorite meal is a can of beans and a hot dog chopped up. And he said, that's who I am. That's my favorite food. What about sex? At Highland Park Presbyterian Church, my predecessor, Clayton Bell, practiced the Billy Graham sex rule. Our vice president, Mike Pence, does that. At least I've heard he won't be alone in a room with a woman. Clayton Bell wouldn't do that. Billy Graham was never alone in a room with a woman other than Ruth, his wife. And I remember getting to Highland Park, and of course, they would tell me the lore of my predecessor, and so I thought, should I do that? Well, I'm not trying to brag or anything. That's not one of my Achilles heels, and I've for me, that felt like kind of a fortress mentality. So I've met with women one-on-one alone all the time, and it hasn't. But I'm just saying, Billy made sure nothing would ever happen in that area. Power is a different story. Billy wrestled, this really comes out in the book, he agonizingly wrestled over becoming a celebrity. And doors opened for him everywhere, ecclesiastically, politically. You know, every pastor from Truman, even up until Obama, courted him. Truman said, I don't like the guy. He's a bumpkin. Get him out of here. So that's the only president he had no relationship with him. Eisenhower can't prove Billy leads him to Christ, but you know, Eisenhower is the only president that was baptized in office by Dean Nelson's brother, Dr. Edward L.R. Nelson at the National Presbyterian Church. And Billy and Dwight Eisenhower became close friends. He was really close with Nixon, and that was the dog that really bit him. Nixon really used Billy, and Billy couldn't see it. There was a naivety there that, I mean, if I had been escorted into the White House, I'm sure I would have crashed and burned. It's amazing that Billy navigated it as well as he did. He took these presidents as, on face value, thought they were really wanting to grow in Christ. And some of them did. It's fascinating, LBJ's relationship with him. I've never thought a lot of LBJ. I mean, he did some crooked things to get elected. And I told you I read this in Indonesia. Coming back from Indonesia, I watched the films on the airplane, LBJ with Woody Harrelson. Does a great job impersonating LBJ. And you see in that film some things I never expected, and that's LBJ struggling with his faith openly. And this was not a Christian film, you know, they didn't need to bring that in. And you see LBJ, especially in the Vietnam War, he knew his decisions were costing the lives of American boys and Vietnamese people. And you find Johnson praying in that movie. He's calling Billy. Billy probably spent more time in the White House with LBJ than anybody except maybe Nixon. And LBJ, we had him there for spiritual reasons. And often Billy was his spiritual counselor, and they would pray together. So LBJ actually comes out looking pretty good. But Billy gets used big time, and he regrets that. He says that in some of these interviews. So anyway, let's see here. Another fallible area for Billy was family life. He loved Ruth. He never, was unfaithful to her. But he says here, I let my family down. I was on the road too much. If I could do it over again, I neglected my family. And that cost them. They had 5 kids, 3 girls and 2 boys. And every one of those kids, except Anne, who's now Anne Graham Lotz, rebelled pretty much big time. All the girls are divorced, at least once. Franklin looked hopeless. He was a wild man. You can read his autobiography. But they've all come back to Christ, and all are walking with Christ, and all have ministries now, and those ministries are extending down to their grandchildren. So it's like the spiritual DNA of Billy has pulled them all back and is being passed on in generations to come. But he said, I'd do it all over again and not be on the road and say no to a lot of things. A little aside here, when Ann and when I left seminary, well, no, I hadn't left seminary. I did an intern year between my 3rd and 4th years in seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina, Billy's hometown, at Forest Hill Presbyterian Church, at the corner of Woodlawn and Scaly Bark Road. And I had a running route. I was a big runner back then. I'd go up to Park Road and turn right. And 3 days a week, I would run by Billy Graham's boyhood home. It was about 3/4 of a mile from the church, and we lived right across the street from the church. And it'd been a dairy farm when Billy grew up there. The family still owned the house, but there's a Park Road shopping center on their dairy land now. But Billy's mother, every time I would run by, she was always sitting on the front porch in a rocking chair, rocking. And she'd always wave to me as I went by. That's just another connection I have with the Graham family. But and she probably, more than his dad, was a great influence on him as to his faith. Now, I think I need to close this down, but a couple other things that Billy was cutting edge on. Racism. I mean, the guys from the South, many of his crusades were in the South. Billy bucked the trend. He was not a segregationist. He integrated his crusades. To be fair, and Martin brings this out, it was very easy for him to integrate in the North, but when they had a crusade in the South, oftentimes they'd have a black section and a white section, and Billy was against that, but nobody's going to come, and he would give in, and he was sorry for that later, and then later on, finally, he just said, no, anybody can sit anywhere, and African Americans loved Billy. They knew he was for them. Same with Roman Catholics. You know, it's hard to believe that you remember the 1960 presidential election. You know, if Kennedy gets elected, the Pope's going to be running. It seems crazy now, but back in those days, and Protestants didn't really mess with Roman Catholics. You wouldn't have them on your platform at an evangelistic rally. Billy did. He said, I want Roman Catholics here. And he got to know Bishop Fulton Sheen was one of his big supporters. And so Billy really pioneered opening the door and said, there are born-again Christians in the Roman Catholic Church. And there are, folks. I know many of them. His theology was pretty simple. He said, I'm not a theologian. He believed the Bible was the inspired, infallible Word of God, and that was his anchor. He wrestled, though, with that. It wasn't you. Billy is very honest about his doubts in here. I used to carry a Billy Graham column in my wallet for years till my wallet was stolen. And somebody wrote in and said, do you ever have doubts? And he said, oh, I'm filled with doubts. But he says, here's what I do. I make it a practice to believe my beliefs and doubt my doubts. And I've taken that, carried that with me all these years in my head. That's pretty much a good way to live. Let me tell you one more story. It comes out in here. In his Los Angeles crusade, which was his first big one back in the early 50s, the gangster that ran the mob, the mafia connection in Los Angeles, was a guy named Mickey Cohen. And the buzz went through L.A. Mickey Cohen actually showed up at a Billy Graham crusade one night, actually went forward when Billy Graham gave the invitation. Now, I was on the executive committee in Dallas, so I know how this works. If you go forward, you fill out a card, name, address, blah, blah, blah. Are you a member of a church? If you're not, that card is given to a pastor in town who's to go by and visit you and encourage you not to go to their church, but in your area, they have a list of churches that they encourage you to try. Now, imagine you're a pastor in Los Angeles, and you're given the cards that people went for. Mickey Cohen, bless his heart, I don't know who the pastor was, went and visited Cohen and said, gosh, Mr. Cohen, it's great you've come to Christ. Now, Cohen ran all the prostitution, gambling, drugs, everything. He says, this is a big commitment for you to give all that up. And Mickey Cohen said, what do you mean give it all up? And he said, well, you can't be a Christian to do that. And he said, wait a minute, I went to this thing, and the guy got up and said, I'm an actor, and I wasn't a Christian, but now I'm a Christian actor. And sports guy got up and says, now I'm a Christian baseball player. I want to be a Christian gangster. It doesn't quite work that way, I don't think. Anyway, I could go on and on, but you guys need to go do other things. I do want to close. You know, I'm the U.S. Advisory Committee for what's called the Lausanne Movement. That was something started by Billy Graham, the Lausanne Congress for World Evangelization. It has done more to change missions in the world. It started in 1974. I got to go to the third Congress in Cape Town back in 2010. That has changed the world for missions more than anything else ever in the life of missions. Billy spawned that. And he had a film production unit, part of the Billy Graham. He was cutting edge in all kinds of audio-visual stuff, way ahead of his time. Let me close by reading a paragraph that kind of sums it all up on page 603. This is William Martin writing. He says, "If results are the metric, Billy was the best who ever was at what he did. But he attained that height through hard and honest work, not through inheritance or blind chance. Always ready to use the latest technology to accomplish his goals and maintain his prominence, he nevertheless insisted that his most valuable asset was a circle of loyal friends. He walked with royalty and received unprecedented media attention for over 4 decades, but was still something of a small-town boy, astonished that anyone would think him special. In a profession stained by scandal, he stands out as the clearly identified exemplar of clean living integrity. In a society riven by divorce, he and the wife of his youth reared 5 attractive and capable children, all of whom are now faithful Christians with their own intact families. He is, in short, an authentic American hero." Thank you.
Please feel free to ask.
You want Q&A?
Sure.
Sure, okay. I have nowhere to go, so I can stay here all night.
I like maps and geography, and one of the stunning things about him is the scope, the geographic scope of his ministry. You know, he had these, but now what about foreign? I mean, you know, you think of Billy Graham, well, he's an American, he's a quintessential American religious guy, you know, but what about world? What about what about the scope beyond the borders of the United States?
Oh, this comes out in the book. During the middle of the Cold War, he's determined to have a crusade in Russia. Well, that's the last thing. You know, he pulls it off, and they want him back. And he went everywhere, and they said, it's not going to work here. No one's going to show up. And he'd go, well, if 2 or 3 people show up, maybe we'll just have one night. And, you know, 20,000 people would show. It was counterintuitive what he did. And he was told, don't go there, by his own board. Do not go there. And he said, no, God's telling me where to go there. And he had kind of, well, God has the Midas touch, but through Billy, he really had no failures. Everything was anointed. People showed up. People came to Christ. He had one of the highest percentages of people coming forward was in Alamo Stadium in 1954, 55 or something like that. I think it was 28% of the people one night came forward. That was unprecedented in any of his crusades.
Russia was actually his last country that he had been in. He went to all of them at one time, and they said his last crusade was in Moscow. The Arena, some of you may have met her. When I mentioned this today, she wanted to come. She said, because I remember when he came to Russia. And
you know, one of his Korea crusades, one of those times, over 1 million people showed up at one time. They have a picture of it, I think in the book here, taken from behind him. He's at this pulpit, and it's just a sea of over 1 million people showed up. They got wind that it was going to be, they didn't have it in a stadium, they had it in some place where, you know, just an open field.
how they set something up, a covered kind of prefab thing, with some of his crusades where they didn't have enough.
At the time, that was the largest gathering of human beings ever in the history of the world. That's been duplicated. I was at the Promise Keepers men's thing on the mall in Washington. It was over 1 million men. But at that time, that was the largest group of people ever to come together for any reason, history of the world. Other question?
When I read the book, it was a wonderful book, and at the end of it, I went back and thought about the title, would you have titled the Billy Graham story, "The Prophet with Honor"?
Well, you know, he makes a play on a biblical saying of Jesus, that a prophet is without honor in his hometown. And I think he's trying to telegraph to people, they're going, is this a hit piece? No, a prophet with honor kind of gives it away, that he's honoring him.
But I don't think Billy did any prophesying.
No. You know, his preaching did change. He was very much anti-communist in his early preaching, and he was very much fire and brimstone. And he really mellowed over the years and began to emphasize the love of Christ rather than the wrath of God. But it comes out clearly here, he was never willing to budge off the core of the gospel, that Jesus is the only way to salvation. And in human sexuality areas, he never caved on that, and he was pressured by people to do so. No. But he was always gracious and winsome about it. And one of the things that really comes out here, too, is he had plenty of critics, particularly from the mainline church and non-Christians. His biggest critic, probably in the mainline church, was Reinhold Niebuhr at Union Seminary in New York. And he got some blistering letters from Niebuhr. And Billy never responds in kind. He always is gracious and says, you know, you're probably right on some of these things. I'm going to think deeply about them. So he never fired back. And as Billy's a Celt, and I am too. I'm ready to let my William Wallace sword and go, whoa. I've got to check myself. Billy was just a gracious man. I think he was so secure in his call that if you criticize him, you go, well, you know, I listen to a higher authority than you. But he was never nasty to anybody. Amazing guy.
His autobiography is called Just As I Am, Billy Graham.
Yeah, that's the authorized one that he approved. I think Billy would approve this. He's looking down on us right now and going, yeah, good book. I'm sure he read it. Any other questions? Or?
Does the book mention Howard Butt at all?
Oh, yeah. Howard Butt's mentioned in there. I underline all the people I knew. And his life intersects with so many church people and political people and world leaders. It's just, and he never tried to do it. It just, they were courting him. Howard's mentioned a number of times here in a favorable way.
I guess Howard was highly influenced by Billy, right? And they worked together?
Yeah. Howard was an evangelist at one time. And,
I remember Howard being known as the regional Billy Graham. You know, he was definitely, you know, Billy was again honored like that.
Another of his associate evangelists was a guy named Lane Adams. He's mentioned a lot here. Well, Lane winds up leaving the Billy Graham Association, not because he lost his faith, because he took the call to Second Presbyterian Church in Memphis, Tennessee. Well, that was my wife, Ann's, home church. And Lane married Ann and me. So that's another intersection of our lives with the Graham legacy.
Howard Butt was part of the youth evangelism phase in history, and Buckner Fanning was one of them. There were several of them that did youth revivals all the time, and he makes reference to it in his biography.
And Buckner was asked to go on the Billy Graham staff. He said, no, I'm a pastor, church, and he declined to do that. Anybody else?
Well, what a wonderful time that we've had with you, and thank you so much for reviewing this book. And let's put.
Well, in the spirit of Billy Graham, you may be in a bar, you may be in your own home. The buses will wait. Come on forward. Sing Just As I Am. Yep, I'm proud to be one of his spiritual sons.